is Joshua Wehner. I'm talking today about diversity. I'm talking about the diversity problem in the Ruby community. And I'm going to talk a bit about why it's a problem and some things we can do together to try to fix it. So that just stopped. Hold on. Yes, better. Okay. What diversity problem? What am I talking about? I want to start with gender diversity. In 2009, girls were just 18% of the AP computer science takers. There's a bunch of AP tests, chemistry, history, physics. This 18% of computer science, that's the lowest female ratio of any AP test. Women currently hold about half of all professional occupations in the United States, but only about 25% of computer-related occupations. In 2009, women earned about 18% of all computer science degrees. This is down. In 1985, it was about 37% of all computer science degrees. There's research by Maria Clave that computer science, IT, and engineering are among the few fields that are actually getting worse. A lot of other traditionally male-dominated industries like law or medicine, they've been getting better in recent years, while we're getting worse. It's hard to come up with an exact number for something like the Ruby community, but we could look at something like attendance at a large Ruby event. So like last year's RubyConf, we had 750 total attendees, 39 women. That's about 5.5%. This year's RubyConf, we have about 500 attendees, 30 women. We're now at 6%. It's a little tricky to come up with numbers for something like open source in general. There was a big survey done a few years ago. Now, it isn't always possible to determine someone's gender from their open source contribution. Sometimes it's just an email address or a GitHub handle. But where it is possible, this survey found that women were about 1% of all open source contributors. But we don't just have a gender diversity problem. We have a racial diversity problem. The statistics may be a little old right now, but as of 1997, 0.25% of all computer science professors in North America were black. But we have other diversity problems. We have an age diversity problem. Most of us in the Ruby community are in our 20s or maybe early 30s. There aren't a lot of people that are much older than that in the Ruby community. We have an economic diversity problem. A lot of us in the Ruby community can afford a MacBook, an iPhone, an iPad. We might be looking to buy a MacBook Air, and we can afford to replace them every year when Apple produces a new one. That's not true of most of the rest of the world, especially right now. We have an operating system diversity problem. Most of us in the Ruby community are using a Mac, and the Windows experience for Ruby was really bad for a really long time, because there weren't enough people in the Ruby community that used Windows that were aware of the problems. It's gotten a little better lately, but for a lot of people, their first experience with Ruby is on Windows. I know for me it was. So having that experience be bad might be keeping people from entering the community who might be sort of Ruby curious, but having that initial experience be so bad might be keeping them away. The important thing to me is that in our field, big discrimination is relatively rare compared to a lot of other industries. There's not a lot of overt sexism or racism, but there's a lot of small discrimination, small bias that starts at a very young age. There was a survey that if a family owns exactly one computer, it's most often found in the bedroom of the oldest boy. There's this really interesting project. Yes. Does the survey have any information about causality? This one did not, but we'll get to a little bit more of that later, and I can talk about that. I can talk your ear off. It's a little outside the scope here, but we might get to it. Okay. There is this project called Project Implicit. It's run by Harvard University. I'll have links to everything later on Twitter. So the idea with Project Implicit is to come up with an objective measure of bias. They have around 40 different tests you can take that can give you a bias score. I'm going to run through one just to kind of give you an idea of how they work. So the test I took to make these screenshots is looking at bias and gender in the workplace. So the way it works is they're going to give you a prompt. So the first set are coming from one of two categories. It's either going to be a man's name or a woman's name. They use, I think, the E key for the left side of the keyboard, and the I key for the right side. So they prompt you with a name. If it's a man's name, you hit the sort of left side of your keyboard. Woman's name, you hit the right side. You do this like 15 or 20 times, 15 or 20 different names, and then they give you a second set of words. Again, in this test, the second set are like family-related words, so things like children or parents, home. The second set of words are career-related words, words like manager, office, or salary. Where it gets interesting is when they combine all four categories together. Now, they're still prompting you with one word at a time, but this time it can be either a man's name, a woman's name, a family-related word, or a career-related word. What the test is actually measuring is your speed, how long it takes you to answer each prompt. For me, and for most people, there's a slight bias. You're slightly faster when they combine man's name and career-related words on the same side of the screen, and slightly slower when they combine women's names and career-related words on the same side of the screen. The idea is that this speed represents an internal bias, our brain's tendency to run in a certain direction. We're geeks. We like having measurements and benchmarks, and I think this is really useful to get a sense of what sort of prejudice I might be bringing to the table. They have a bunch of other tests. They have tests that look at things like age, race. They have some that use photos instead of words. Again, I'll post links later, but I really recommend if you get a chance later to run through some of their tests and just get a sort of a baseline, get a sense of where you're coming from. They've done similar studies looking at the same phenomena happening in the real world. They find a job ad, and they create nearly identical fake resumes. The details are very similar. Same work experience, same educational background. The difference is the name at the top of the resume. And they find that the more that name sounds like a white man's name, the more likely they are to get a callback for an interview. In some cases, twice as likely. They also did a version of this where they attach a photo. If it's a man's name and a man's photo, their odds of getting a callback go up compared to a man's resume without a photo. If it's a woman's name and a woman's photo, even like similarly attractive photos, the woman's name with a woman's photograph, their odds of getting a callback go down. This statistic holds up even when the hiring manager is a woman or a minority. But why should we care? Why does this stuff matter? Why is diversity so important? I think a lack of diversity can blind us to prejudices we may have. I'm curious, how many of you have a cell phone that looks something like this? Big, color, touchscreen, runs a lot of apps? Okay, and how many of you have a cell phone that looks like this? Okay, for those of you who've never seen it before, this is the Nokia 1100. This is the most popular web-capable cell phone in the world. There are 250 million units sold to date. There were 50 million units sold in the last year alone. That's about the same as iPhone 4's total sales. Now, it's mostly in Africa and the developing world. This is a really rugged phone. It can work in really harsh environments. And it's affordable. It costs about $30 US. My point is, if you're building a Rails website and you're making it mobile friendly, and you mean it runs on one of these, you're missing out on 250 million potential customers who get online every day with one of these. But more than just a bias in sort of our empathy, there's research that suggests diverse teams actually perform better. They looked at transcripts from juries, like jury deliberations. They found that diverse juries deliberated longer and discussed more facts from the case than all white or all male juries. They've done similar research looking at patent filing. I know software patents are sort of controversial, but in general, the patents created by mixed gender teams were cited more often by other work. In the patent world, that's considered a sign that they're more innovative or more useful, even though women are only involved in about 9% of all patent filings in the United States. And there's this phenomenon called imposter syndrome. It's this feeling that other people expect you to be performing at a level that you just aren't capable of. This is inaccurate. The people who have this, they're, by any objective measure, by any sort of performance evaluation, they are very highly performing people. But they feel like their sort of internal sense of their capabilities is not matching up with what they think other people expect them to be capable of. It's not only experienced by women. Anyone can feel like an imposter. But there's research that suggests when you're a minority in your field, when you don't see peers or role models that look like you, you're more likely to feel like an alien or an outsider or an imposter. So we have people who are extremely capable but feel like they aren't and are constantly afraid that they're going to be discovered. And there's this thing where at a neurological level, your brain is not capable of experiencing fear and creativity at the same time. The part of the brain that experiences fear produces this chemical block that shuts off your ability for creative thinking. So a lack of diversity may be leading us to miss business opportunities. It may cause us to have weaker teams and less creativity and less innovation. The thing that concerns me, especially for gender diversity, are the studies showing that we're getting worse, that women are actively leaving the field. There was a survey of 3,700 women engineers, people who have degrees in engineering or have worked as engineers who've since left. 25% said their reason for leaving had something to do with family. Maybe they wanted to start a family or move to be near family. 75% said that their reason for leaving engineering had to do with a hostile workplace culture. 3/4 of the women who've left engineering said they left because of us. Sorry? What was the time period for this? This was done a couple of years ago. I think it was 2007 or 2008.
So it was just a snapshot?
The women were a variety of ages, but they had left the field recently. I don't remember the exact details, but I'll have links later. There's links in the slides, and I'll have slides later, but yes.
One minority category I've not heard anything about is GLBTQ people.
That's true. It's an issue, but it's less visible. So I'm focusing on gender a bit because it's 50% of the population, and it's visible at a surface level. But those other things are issues too.
I'd like to see that same chart for men. I'm in the process of getting out of engineering because of a hostile workplace culture. And it has nothing to do with gender.
Thank you. It's true, yes. Okay, so
Hostile these days.
what sort of culture have we built that's so hostile it's driving people away?
Business school graduates.
I think sometimes we have a culture that's a little bit arrogant. We're a bit boastful. We have a lot of pride in our own personal experiences and having our own ideas. I think we see this on Twitter a lot. So I want to talk a little bit about things we can do about this. Okay, so I mentioned earlier this bias for names on resumes and applications. And I see a lot in the Ruby community job ads asking people to submit their GitHub profiles along with their application and resume. So one concern I have with this is that every page on GitHub that has my code on it has my name and photo at the top of that page. So if you're in a position where you're recruiting, get a friend or an accomplice to anonymize the applications, photocopy them, and replace the names and photos with something like applicant 1. You need someone else to help you do this so you can tie it back to the right person at the end, but you want to avoid having your initial impression be biased.
I have a hard time with some of the places where they get their degrees, for example. That's going to be really hard to do.
How enough of a resume snapshot? I mean, you haven't met the person yet. What you're looking at is just static.
Sure.
And so you can anonymize that.
So they get it from Bangalore as their degree. You think they're probably most likely Indian. It's pretty likely.
Or if they went to Howard University.
Yeah.
Which is predominantly black school.
Well,
right? There are limits, but we can still do everything we can. I have another concern about this GitHub profile as an application matter. I hear a lot of people who are asking for this say that they're looking at GitHub profiles to see open source contributions as a sign of passion. The idea seems to be that people who have a lot or important open source contributions must be more passionate developers. I think that could be true, but I think it could be a couple other things. There's this study where they call up couples on the phone and they ask how they feel about sharing housework. So what sort of percentage the man and woman are sharing in household chores and childcare. For couples where they said the husband does about half, about a week after the phone call, a team of researchers show up at the front door with stopwatches. And they time them. Every time they're doing anything involving the children, household chores like laundry or vacuuming, they find that even for those couples where they said on the phone that they split things even, they find that the women are still doing 3 to 7 times more household chores and childcare every week than the men are. So I think in some cases, having fewer open source contributions might just mean that those people have better things to do with their spare time. But I think it's also something else. I think for some people, passion is another word for obsession. I think we have trouble in this community finding a balance between work life and regular life. And I think there are some employers who are trying to find passionate people because they want to exploit them. I think they want to find people who will work longer days and spend their weekends and free time working on company work instead of having a life outside of the office. I think in general we could be a lot more careful about how we talk about things. There was this study was done by Duke University. They placed nearly identical ads. So I'm curious. I'm curious. Show of hands if you would be more likely to apply to the ad on the left. It's okay. Okay. Show of hands if you'd be more likely to apply to the ad on the right. Okay, interesting. So when they did this study, they found that men were more likely to apply to the ad on the left, and women were more likely to apply to the ad on the right. They've done a couple different versions of this in different industries, and they found in general, men are more likely to apply to ads that talk about individuals and use lots of words that mean best. So words like superior or rock star or ninja. Women are more likely to apply to ads that talk about collaboration or community or teamwork. So I think it's possible that some of the ads we write may, by their very choice of words, may be turning away some applicants. In general, I'm a big believer that language matters. And one of the things that I think that's driving the culture of arrogance that we have is we have a very linear definition of being a programmer. You're either a newbie, a rock star, or you're somewhere in between on a straight line. I think that makes this environment where in order to describe yourself in relation to someone else, you have to be going one above them. I think there's more to being a programmer than just being a newbie or being awesome. I'd like to have a less linear definition of being a programmer. We could have a definition that talks about the craft. We could talk about different skill sets. We could talk about people as being an expressive developer, like for the language they use and the way they communicate, or an empathic developer, someone who's able to relate well with customers, people in other departments. We could talk about someone as being a reliable developer. They have consistent output. But we could treat these things as if they're separate traits, that some people will be better at some than others. And in general, I think we could put a lot more emphasis on collaboration. We could define programming as an activity where we work together as a group to collectively build something that's greater than what any individual could have built by themselves. I think if we made that the priority, we'd see a different sort of community. I'm a big fan of this book called The No Asshole Rule by Robert Sutton. I feel like I need to be clear because asshole means a lot of different things to different people. And I don't just mean someone who's rude sometimes. Everybody's rude sometimes. I'm rude sometimes. I'm talking about people who are consistently demeaning to people they see as beneath them. I think we've all worked in companies where there's someone, that guy, it's usually a guy, but it's not always a guy, the one you can't let in the room with the customer. I don't mean the ones that are shy or awkward. I mean the guys who are constantly talking down to everyone they think is beneath them. The designers, the marketing, the customers are all idiots. I think instead of talking about those guys as if they're good developers, but we just need to hide them in the closet somewhere, I think we should actually say that they're bad developers. I think we should treat them as if they're incompetent. I'm not saying we kick them out, but I think we should reprogram them and train them, get them to be less of an asshole. I'd like to be part of a Ruby community where we knew when to argue and when to stop fighting and get stuff done. I think we could all do better at having constructive conflict instead of destructive conflict. We could fight about things that actually matter instead of small things like bits of syntax, whether you use VI or Emacs, whether you like tabs or spaces. Those are all personal preferences, and they shouldn't be things we waste our time on. But I think we can go further. I think instead of just being a culture that tolerates other people's differences, I think we could become a culture that actively seeks out different experiences and variety. There's a guy, Professor Richard Wiseman at the University of Hertfordshire, wanted to figure out what makes people lucky. He put an ad in the newspaper and got 400 people who either perceive themselves as being extraordinarily lucky or extra unlucky. And he put them through a bunch of experiments to see what made someone lucky. And my favorite one, he has the subject look at a newspaper, and the researchers tell them they would like them to count the number of photographs in the newspaper. Lucky people do this a lot faster than unlucky people, sometimes half the time. So what is it that lucky people are doing different? There's a trick. About 6 pages into the newspaper, they hid this block of text that says, "Stop counting. There are 43 photographs in the newspaper." Lucky people saw it, stopped counting, and told the researchers there were 43 photographs. Unlucky people never saw this text. The researchers thought maybe it's a visual thing, maybe they don't trust it, they weren't sure, so they tried another version. They made the letters 2 inches high, and this time it said, "Stop counting, tell the experimenter you've seen this and win $250. Still, lucky people saw this, unlucky people never saw it. So in order to try to figure out what makes people lucky, they did some interviews. They asked them questions about their everyday lives and things like how they got the current job. They found that in general, lucky people were deliberately introducing variety into their lives. They took a different path to work every day. They would eat at different restaurants, and they'd order different kinds of food. Unlucky people took the same path to work every day. They only ever ate at the same restaurants, and they only ever ordered the same food. And they would ask them questions about things like how they got the job they're in now. Lucky people would say things like, "Well, it's really odd. I just happened to turn down the street I never go on, and there was this ad looking for people." Or, "I went to this restaurant I'd never eaten at before, and they were looking for waiters." Lucky people were deliberately introducing these opportunities. We talk about this as though it's just luck. It's something that just happens to you. But lucky people, by purposefully introducing variety, had opened themselves up to more opportunity and given themselves greater opportunity to act on it. That's what luck really is, the combination of opportunity and ability to act. I think as developers, we could spend a little bit more time outside the comfort zone. More than any other group I know, we tend to have hobbies that are nearly indistinguishable from our jobs. If you're hacking all day at work and hacking all night at home, I think you could maybe spend just a little bit more time outside of that box. I think if you spend a lot of your time around assholes, especially people that make sexist, racist, or homophobic jokes, I think you should find better places to be. if you're part of a regular, like a meetup, a user group, maybe even a Ruby club, where everyone looks like you, I think maybe you should leave. I know it's a little harsh, but a couple of things. There are organizations that are actively trying to improve the situation in the Ruby community. There's groups like RailsBridge, Girl Develop It, Ladies Learning Code, that are out actively in the community trying to bring more diversity into the Ruby universe. But I think it's important to remember that we're constantly being bombarded with the message that this is what a good developer looks like. At events like this, the majority of the attendees are men, the majority of the speakers are men, and online, this is from CoderWall. I know the photos are a little small, but it's basically a bunch of dudes and a penguin. These are the faces of the Rails core team, the made men of Ruby on Rails. I don't think this is deliberate. I don't think it's on purpose. But I think if you're just a casual observer of the Ruby community and you're wondering what does it take to be a good Ruby developer, you might accidentally walk away with the impression that it helped if you were a white man. And we get this message all the time. And if you're in a regular meeting group where everyone looks the same, then it's being reinforced on a constant basis. I think we can change some of that. There's this great Flickr group called This Is What a Computer Scientist Looks Like, where women that have computer science backgrounds post photos of themselves. And the whole idea is to change this image of what computer scientists look like. So that when women do come to technical events and conferences, they aren't always being asked whether they're designers or if they work in marketing or if they're someone's spouse. I think a lot of us as developers have the idea that we've created a sort of perfect meritocracy. We have this belief that people who succeed in our field are there because of their own drive and strength, their contributions. But there's all these little things that add up. There was this quote's from an internal study done at MIT in the 90s of female faculty members at MIT. Most of the departments didn't have very many, but when they compared across departments, they found that women at MIT were being paid less, had fewer perks, were sent to fewer conferences, but they also found that their offices were smaller. When they measured them, they found that women's offices were smaller by several inches, even compared to like male counterparts with similar like work experience and seniority. Sorry?
No, that's everywhere. Seriously.
I bet it is.
It's not just computers.
Like, these are like small things, right? Like office size. Maybe that doesn't really matter, but this small stuff happens all the time and it adds up. To kind of summarize, I think we could reprogram or remove all the assholes, anonymize applications and proposals. We could all spend more time outside of our comfort zone, and we could all be just a little weird. Sorry? Right, so I don't mean like creepy weird.
He means don't hack all day for work and then go home and then hack for a hobby.
I think by be weird, I mean breaking outside of the box, defying the stereotypes of what a programmer's supposed to do. I think stereotypes change over time. This used to be a female-dominated industry. 50 years ago, when the US was developing the first computer, the ENIAC, all of the programmers were women. Stereotypes aren't fixed, we can change them. I think people who can break out of stereotypes are amazing. There's a lot of power in doing things that aren't expected of you. We're way more affected by other people's expectations than we think we are. They've done studies where they show up at a school, young kids, like grade 3 or 4. They show up at the beginning of the year, and they give the students a test. They tell the teachers that this test has been specially designed to highlight students that are on the verge of an intellectual breakthrough, a sort of like mental growth spurt. The test doesn't actually do anything like that. The researchers pick 20% of the class at random, and they tell the teachers that Those are the students the test has identified as being on the cusp of this growth spurt. They don't tell the students, they just tell the teachers. And they find that when they come back at the end of that year, those students are performing way better than their peers. They spend more time working on homework. Their grades are better. Teachers describe them as being more intellectually curious. They were picked at random. What they think is happening is over the course of a year, the teacher's impression that those students are about to have a breakthrough adds up in lots of small encouragements. Maybe they smile just a little bit more. Maybe they give them just a little bit of slack when they're having a rough day. There's this, a lot of the research on this focuses on young kids, and the theme for this is called Stereotype Threat Inoculation. The idea is sort of like a brain hack, like counter-programming, changing the idea of what's expected of people. There's this statistic, girls in some places do a little bit less on math and science than boys. But they found that if the instructor at the beginning of the test says something like, you may have heard this myth that girls perform less well on these tests, but the test you're about to take has been shown to equalize scores between boys and girls. The girls' scores pull even with the boys. The Educational Testing Service, the group that runs all of the standardized tests for college admissions in the US, the SAT, ACT, they used to do this demographic survey at the beginning of the exam. They'd ask you your race, your age, your gender. They found that just by moving that demographic survey from the beginning of the exam to the end, girls' scores on average went up 4 points. So if being reminded that you're not supposed to be good at something makes you less good at something, maybe we should all work harder at changing the definition of what we're supposed to be good at or what we're supposed to look like. I love this guy. This is Rosie Greer. He's an American football player. He's a big guy. He was a linebacker in like the 70s and 80s. He was in a Coke commercial. He was in Free to Be You and Me. And he loved needlepoint. He used to do needlepoint between games. He said it helped him relax and focus. He wrote a book, Rosie Greer's Needlepoint for Men. And I love the idea. I love people who can break out of stereotypes and be something different than what other people expect. I think it's important to remember that this is not something that's likely to change overnight. Programming a whole community is hard. Making these sorts of changes aren't likely to have an immediate payoff. But I think it's worth it in the long run. I think we can change the community. I think we can make a difference. And I think it's worth it to try. Thank you.